Good afternoon in Africa, good morning in the United States, and good evening for those joining from East Asia and for the first time, Australia. Welcome to the monthly Africa-US Forum. The topic this month, the BRICS Plus. After this month's meeting of BRICS nations leaders, we will discuss and analyze implications for expansion in Africa with speakers from across Africa and in person here in Washington, D.C. This forum is on the record and is being recorded. Video will be available on demand later on the USC Africa-US website, where you can find video of all of these forums. Our next Africa-US forum will be Monday, August the 25th at the same time. We also have a special Africa forum next Monday, August 4th at 12 noon Eastern Daylight Time. That's 3 hours later than this one. Our regular first Monday public diplomacy lunch here in Washington and online will be about the information war in Africa and the future of great power, soft power on the continent. More about that at the end of the program. These monthly forums are presented by, in alphabetical order, the African Center for the Study of the United States at the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, the Annenberg Center for Communication, Leadership and Policy, University of Southern California, the Center for African Studies at George Washington University, the Institute for African Studies at George Washington University, and the Institute on Inequalities in Global Health at the University of Southern California Keck School of Medicine. And last but not least, the Public Diplomacy Council of America, which is represented today by co-president. More from him at the end. Now for a welcome from Africa, let's go to the African Center for the Study of the United States in Johannesburg at Wits University, and Kabaso, Kabwe.
Thank you very much, Adam, and hello to everyone. Again, thank you for joining us today for this very timely discussion on BRICS Plus, analyzing implications of expansion in Africa. So as Adam mentioned, these forums are held monthly and have been held since about December 2022. And just for a brief on the African Center for the Study of the US, we were established in 2018 to fill a critical gap in research and engagement dedicated exclusively to understanding the US in the context of sub-Saharan Africa. But obviously, as you know, to study the US meaningfully, and especially in a world where power is increasingly contested, we also have to study its peers and its competitors, especially in today's shifting global landscape. So today's topic on expansion of BRICS, which has included some African countries like Egypt and Ethiopia, with many more being considered as partner members, is really not just a geopolitical development. It's also a reflection of deeper global realignments. And so for us today, we want to question a lot of things. What does this expansion mean for Africa? Obviously, there's both opportunities and complex questions. What does this mean for Africa's global governance? Why are African countries even being included in BRICS? What does this even mean for Africa's engagement with the global North? So I'm excited about today's conversation to unpack these and many more questions, and really to help us think critically about how Africa navigates its place amid both traditional powers and emerging blocs like the BRICS Plus. I won't say too much, and I'll hand it over back to Adam. Thank you so much again.
Thank you. And just to note, you all should have bios of all of our speakers. We are going to begin by going back to Africa for analysis of the recently concluded BRICS country leadership meeting from Allan Wefwafwa, who is a lecturer teaching at both the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg and at the Technical University in Kenya. And so, Jobal, you are next.
Thank you, Adam. Hello, everyone. Yeah, I'm Allan Wefwafwa. I have this panoramic view of the BRICS coverage in African media. And I just mapped out to see, going by region across Africa, the Southern Africa, the Eastern Africa, the Northern Africa, the Western Africa, And in the Southern Africa, there is South Africa, who's a BRICS main member, and Zimbabwe is there. Though Zimbabwe is not considered the main member, and Nigeria in the West. Nigeria describes the status of their membership as the observer status, because they don't have the full powers as South Africa and the others who are the pioneers. And in this mapping out, I realized a few things emerge. First of all is that in most cases in the countries, the governments are the ones in charge of the news that concerns BRICS. For instance, in South Africa, there is the news is distributed from a news agency, government news agency. In, for instance, Uganda, you will see the New Vision, which is a government agency. So it's a newspaper, but it's a government entity. And so the news comes from there to the rest. So then the rest can pick and start criticizing the news, but looks like it originates from the government. And where in the North, the case is slightly different. The news is from government, but they are not articulating African issues, especially in Algeria. They are articulating the Arab issues because they're neighbors. And so they are talking about Palestine. They find BRICS a platform to articulate why Israel should be stopped from invading, say, Iran or the Palestine. And so such are the dynamics that emerge. And again, we see that although the economic issues are the ones driving the African countries to join the BRICS, you'll realize that the debates in the news coverage are not like so much about economic development. South Africa has its share of economic development coverage, but African countries in general struggle. For instance, Zimbabwe struggle to demonstrate why the country is fit to join the BRICS. So they will be like, we want our sovereignty to be respected. That's why we want to align with the BRICS. Looks like the G7, G20 are not respecting our sovereignty well enough. And so there is less economic debates. In Nigeria, you'll find there is more economic debates and matters to do with how, for instance, the country would benefit through investments and the markets, the market share. Actually, Nigeria is very descriptive, it's very detailed in the way they are covering the issues around BRICS. They even tabulate the numbers, arguing there are 4.5 billion people in the BRICS countries. And so that's a market of 4.5 billion people, and their economic share across the world is 40%. 40% of the economy is in the BRICS, and so it provides the market. So you could see such kind of descriptions in Nigeria, even though the very Nigeria is again critical that by their country joining what they call authoritarian countries like Russia, like China, it will compromise their human rights index. Same to Uganda, where human rights are considered like perceived less respected, homosexuality, democracy, they are already on the fringes. And when such a country joins the BRICS, it means such human rights can only be lower in terms of the index. Even South Africa suffers the same. Although it's a main member, there are arguments as to why they should come to work together when South Africa is democratic, while many of the BRICS partners are not. And so there are such issues that come out clearly. But perhaps the most the most interesting aspect. Sorry about this. Perhaps the most interesting aspect is that Trump is mentioned along in these when he says he will slap 10% tariffs to the partners who are joining the BRICS countries. You will see him featuring there, even though all this is not about him. And even as he says he will impose tariffs, 10% tariffs on it, there is another dynamic in which the countries that are joining, the African countries that are joining BRICS are actually still having economic, military ties with the West, with the US. For instance, Egypt has military ties with the US. Nigeria has lots of economic ties with the US and other African countries. And yet, these BRICS countries require that when they trade, when they are having these trade partnerships, they will use local currencies. Now, one wonders, will they really achieve this when, for instance, Nigeria has to still work with the US, where they will be required to use the dollar, and the BRICS will require them to use local currency when dealing with fellow BRICS countries. And so you realize that G20, G7 countries still will remain very powerful in Africa, even as these other countries join BRICS. In a nutshell, I will stop there. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Allan, and that overview of the meeting of the BRICS countries' leadership and also prospects for expansion in Africa, which is our topic today. Let's go next to, we're going to go in not quite alphabetical order, but almost. Next to Joel Odota, who's the founder of the China-Uganda Research Network at Makerere University Business School in Uganda. His work there focuses on China-Africa relations, but he is also working with Australian National University Network's African Studies Network. And he's joining us from Australia, where it is the middle of the night. So thank you for staying up late or getting up early, depending on which time zone you were in. Joel Odota, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Prof, and thank you, everyone. Yeah, I'm joining from Canberra in Australia. It's nearly midnight for us, but that's okay. I am from Uganda, and as you rightly said, I co-founded the China-Uganda Research Network. I was educated in China. I did my Master of Politics and International Relations, focused on Chinese foreign policy from Peking University in Beijing. So I am very much interested in China's engagement with Africa. That's why I'm always, in these sort of forums. So back to our topic on, BRICS expansion in Africa. I think it's very interesting that my country, Uganda, became, one of the very few African countries to be affiliated with this economic bloc. And I'll just talk you through a little bit about my thoughts on Uganda's, joining of the BRICS as a partner nation. Just to pick up from my brother's submission, I think in terms of the news, when we heard that Uganda was admitted as a partner, I think we saw this on the media, but from official government publications, there was not a lot of, cheering. I follow all of the big politicians. I think they've kept it a little bit of a low key. And also in the recently concluded summit, most of the times we'd see the vice president instead of the president join this. What he mentioned is very, very right. About African nations balancing their relationship between put it as Eastern Western powers. they still would like to work with their traditional partners, the Western countries, but also they would like to be, included in these, emerging forums such as the BRICS or some other forums that, for instance, China has initiated, like the Fofack, for instance. So most of them would still be affiliated with these sort of forums. Uganda has a long history of, balancing its relationship with the West. And by the way, we have Africa's second longest serving president in Uganda, and he's been also named the world's third longest serving and, consecutively elected president. And next year, January, we'll be having our general elections. So from 1986 to this time, we've had one president, as you can imagine. So very interesting, picking up from that sort of domestic political situation in Uganda with, the human rights issues. Uganda has had a long running battle with the West, over human rights. But interestingly, the West has always stood by Uganda. This is really what most scholars now call your agency, or how you can leverage what you have. Particularly, Uganda has been trusted by the US. When the US launched its global war on terror, Somalia is just sitting next door to us, not very far to us, and there was the Al-Shabaab threat. Uganda saw that as a big opportunity, and we've been the largest troop contributing country in Somalia. What Americans would consider very risky. Of course, Americans have been giving the money to Uganda to do that heavy lifting. So on top of our, on the one hand, we have all of these human rights records, but also we still remain a darling to the West. And I think this is one reason why President Museveni is not afraid to, publicly criticize the West. He's done that on several occasions because he knows what he has. He knows, his strategic points that the West would want. The other, of course, is also Uganda being a big player in the region. It's very influential in terms of determining the security of the region, the Great Lakes region. You find that in the DRC, the West has always wanted to get involved with all of these conflicts, and it's always easier to go through Uganda. So while we have all of these issues, of course, we've worked very well with both partners. Right now, as we speak, Uganda has been kicked out of the AGOA. You might be familiar with the AGOA, which is the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, enacted a couple of decades ago to create market access for African countries into the US without any tariffs, but also vice versa. So due to, our human rights records, last year, President Joe Biden kicked Uganda and other African countries out, and there are discussions around, readmitting Uganda. Something I see very possible because of, the long history of Uganda playing its cards very, very smartly with the West. And also, there was this recent list that President Trump released to restrict visas for, I think, 36 countries. So we've also been listed, and we've been given the 60-day ultimatum to work on our what he calls issues pertaining to immigration if we were to be excluded from that list. So overall, I think that Uganda, first of all, joining the BRICS is just not new to me. It's just been happening. Uganda is a darling to China, to so many partners. But in terms of the challenges and opportunities for the BRICS, the BRICS normally has had these, debates on the media. Of course, it's a very, very good initiative that has, in my opinion, led to the discussions around global south or developing economies' influence on the global stage, whether it's through politics or trade. I think for so long, everything has been Western dominated, and there were not a lot of talks really about the influence or even the agency of the global south countries. So in my opinion, just to spark these sort of discussions, I've always argued that this is a good thing, regardless of the real economics or the efficacy of the BRICS bloc. But also, I think the other thing is for a nation as small as Uganda, a lot of them have signed on because of, there is that anti-Western movement that, we want to change the international order. We want us to, from the back seat, to move and drive the international agenda. However ambitious it is, I think a lot of these countries have not really thought through critically why they are even joining. They're just joining a movement that has, in my opinion, I've always argued that this was, after the end of the Cold War, it was a continuation of the Cold War politics, where the US and the Soviets still continue to, try to, exert some sort of influence. While, a lot of people think it's like a multipolar world movement, I still try to narrow it down to just, a few poles instead of many poles. Just to be specific, it's just between the East and the West, and the rest of the nations that are joining the BRICS are, playing in this ground that is laid by their only, in my opinion, two goalposts. So it's just about the anti-West, and we have these human rights records, we have all of these conditions, IMF and all of that, and we are against it. But how much of achievement remains to be discussed. I think I'll leave it there for now. That's what I can say, and we can of course still engage further in questions, and just thank you.
Well, first, let's try again for Ashraf Patel. Are you with us?
Yes.
Yes, very good. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Prof. Good afternoon to colleagues. It's a pleasure for us to participate in this relevant seminar. Wearing the academic hat, going forward on the topic of BRICS and multipolarity vis-a-vis African nations' growth within the BRICS club. I think it's useful to kind of reflect, firstly, that both the BRICS as well as the G20 were kind of formed in an era of the financial crisis. And that financial crisis of 2009 was the catalyst in some way of both saving the global financial system, but also critically looking at the kind of risks involved with just one kind of economic model. And therefore, when the BRICS nations formed at the time, and as it has mushroomed over the last 2 or 3 years, there's several major kind of crises that we face that is kind of accelerating the growth of BRICS and other such blocks. And the one is the move towards multipolarity. Of course, with the rise of economic nationalism, especially in the US and also Europe, the Trump tariffs and trade wars, the climate crisis, as well as the post-pandemic economic order. I think all of those experiences in the last several years have collectively kind of accelerated the momentum of the BRICS nations and their growth. And if we look at the latest Rio declaration of BRICS 2 weeks ago, it is definitely, when one compares to other BRICS annual communiques, this one was one of the most kind of comprehensive, very comprehensive communiques at 131 paragraphs. It covered everything on from multipolarity to UN, to climate change, to peace and security conflicts, to AI, through fair trade, etc. And when one reads the communique, it definitely is quite clear that the BRICS bloc and the new nations that are joining and aspirant nations, I have seen a very kind of powerful development proposition. One basically rooted in the UN Charter, in the UN Pact for the Future. I was quite impressed when I read a lot of the paragraphs, especially on saving multilateralism, reigniting the World Trade Organization, which is critical, absolutely critical for African nations and nations of the developing South, pushing for fair trade deals, access to climate finance, infrastructure investment, as well as investment in public health and pandemic support. And collectively, as a package, when you read the communique, it does then become very attractive for nations in Africa, for Southeast Asia, Latin America. A lot of these smaller mid-tier nations or second and third tier nations are now kind of wanting to join BRICS, maybe as a club member, but more formally, informally, to get access to a lot of the development support. And one of the most significant, of course, is the new development bank. So that in a nutshell is the kind of BRICS in 2025 and where in the momentum as we speak. I think I'll stop there for now, and then we can move forward on the other questions.
Thank you. We're still having some internet issues here. So let's continue on. Thank you, Ashraf Patel. And let's go now to Professor Gabriel Moti Ukertor, Professor and Dean at the School of Graduate Studies at the University of Abuja. So Professor, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity to share some perspective on this issue. Coming from my background in public sector management and governance, I have also been involved in some aspects of research in China, Africa. Indeed, we have had opportunity to visit and share experiences and done some write-ups also around Fofack and the rest. And I start with my country, Nigeria, and then go on to expand on Africa itself, why some of the other countries are intending to join and have been given invitation to be part of BRICS Plus. For Nigeria, one of the driving forces has been our dominant role in ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West Africa, and definitely Nigeria doesn't want to lose that leading role. Nigeria has been cooperating, partnering, and working closely with the international finance bodies, IMF, World Bank, mainly controlled by the United States. Even in terms of security, Nigeria has, for a very long time, rested on the US to help in security interventions, which in the past has come. But for the past 13, 15 years, especially when Nigeria started facing this headache of Boko Haram insurgency and the rest, the country discovered that the US was no longer forthcoming in assisting with security issues, given reasons of human rights violations and issues like that. And it was like a dilemma. Even when you put requests for arms to be bought, it wasn't coming. And it also looked at many American officials, including presidents, who are ignoring Nigeria even now. When Trump invited African countries, West Africa, Nigeria was not part of it. And they picked some of the other little so-called Nigerian referred to them as the smaller countries. So Nigeria started, and especially the youth, have started feeling that, look, we have been implementing some of your policies, this aid issues, but they have not been helping us go forward. So there is this switch from the youth, from academia. Why are we taking so much time working with the US, doing all that we can do, sacrificing so much, even having a crisis on the streets? What are we actually benefiting from this? So it seems that it has gotten to those in political authority, and that move towards joining the BRICS became very powerful. And in January this year, Nigeria formally got the invitation to come in as an observer status, which eventually may lead to becoming a permanent member. So for Nigeria, that is it. There are benefits Nigeria is looking forward to, economic benefits. It has been mentioned here by one of the big population we have, a large market. And if we take into consideration the African continental trade issues, Nigeria thinks that is going to be a nice opportunity also. The issues of infrastructure, which is very poor, sometimes in certain areas like electricity, we've been struggling with that for many years. And again, a lot of the problems are coming with the Western companies we have tried to partner with in order to get power sustainable in our country. So some of these reasons are still part of what has pushed the country, driven the country into BRICS Plus. Then the strategic geopolitical influence of Nigeria and West Africa is part of it. I've just mentioned that in passing. It was very trying when we had this three Sahelian countries getting into coups, getting out of ECOWAS, forming their own union, being supported by Russia and all that, when Nigeria was the chair of ECOWAS at that moment. It was a very trying time. So all these are some of the impetus that have led to that. So, but I want to generally look at what I have been trying to check in the past. Why is it necessary for the inclusion of many more African countries into BRICS Plus? I try to look at it in the context of Africa's development goals under what is very popular these days, Agenda 2063, which is the African Union's strategic and ideological alignment. How does this align with BRICS Plus? And I felt it could answer some of the questions that have been posed for this initiative or this forum that we are looking at. So the agenda is the blueprint for transforming Africa into a global powerhouse of the future. The envisions are that there will be inclusive growth, sustainable development, good governance, integration, and self-reliance. And so how will BRICS do this? How will BRICS help this? Africa to achieve some of these flagships. I looked at one of the aspirations, or 2 or 3 aspirations of the Africa Agenda 2063. The first one being a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development. How does BRICS Plus alignment come in here? I think that particularly countries like China, India, and Russia have invested already very heavily in many African countries, whether it's Western Africa, Eastern Africa, Central Africa, Southern Africa. These countries have already invested so much in terms of infrastructure, agriculture, energy, and even digital transformation across our country. And so the African countries are thinking that through the new development bank and other BRICS-led platforms, African countries could access alternative sources of development with fewer political conditionalities that are being offered by the traditional Western lenders. It's a powerful impetus for them. And they hope that it will leverage and bridge the infrastructure deficit, which is very high in many African countries. I've just mentioned that of Nigeria. But it could also be targeted at the flagship of Agenda 2063, the African Integrated High-Speed Rail Network, and that is what the Chinese are targeting in Africa. The Grand Inga Dam project, which is part of what they are also targeting, and then the African Commodity Strategy. So that, for me, explains why many more African countries will want to join the BRICS. The second aspiration of Agenda 2063 I tried to look at was an integrated continent, politically united and based on Pan-Africanism. And I tried to check, how does BRICS Plus alignment get the AU do this? One of the issues is that BRICS Plus encourages regional blocs, and Africa has very strong regional blocs. ECOWAS, for instance, and SADC in Southern Africa. They are very strong, and they can engage in multilateral diplomacy. And this is helping to promote some elements of a unified African voice on the global platform. So, and if this also supports the African continental free trade area by enhancing South-South trade, one hopes that there will be some value chain benefits, investment flows that can come between Africa and the other emerging powers that are part of BRICS. I also tried to look at the third aspiration, which is an Africa of good governance, democracy and respect for human rights. Now, there is some little bit of controversies I found here, or contradictions that one found here. The BRICS countries are promoting non-interference, but also sovereignty, respect for domestic governance models, which seems to resonate with many African nations to reclaim autonomy over their development paths. For instance, why Rwanda, for a long time, Kagame has been winning elections and continue when people are criticizing, oh, he's gone out of term, he's changing constitution. But there are others who are saying, look, don't interfere in what Rwanda is doing. If it works for them, it works. Don't give them your own model of democracy and say it more before 4 or 5 years. So these are some of the contradictions there, but the BRICS is trying to help to allow them the space to experiment with their own governance model, rather than the Western imposed frameworks that if you don't do this, then you are not actually democratic. So the last one, then I stopped to allow other people to also contribute, is Africa with a strong cultural identity, common heritage, and shared values. a lot of the BRICS countries are very strong in culture, like China. So BRICS Plus can foster cultural and academic exchanges. And these have been going on for quite a long time, especially between Africa and China. Academic exchanges, cultural exchanges, the Confucius institutes are many on African continent, including Nigeria. Some ties that are there, knowledge transfer, enhancing mutual understanding and solidarity among developing countries. So it more or less tries to support this Pan-African effort for Africa to reassert its identity, maybe not in a multipolar world, but in a world that two bodies are very strong and one can come in to try to see what can happen. And in terms of the voice in the global governance, Africa has been fighting for this UN Council reform to put members in that Security Council. And perhaps this could be a platform to try to do that. And then the restructuring and the expansion and strengthening of the WTO that the US is kicking out some of African countries, the international financial system reform that many African countries have been fighting. So BRICS Plus probably said it's a vehicle, it's a tool that may likely offer this opportunity to enhance Africa's agency in international relations, provide new avenues for developmental financing and trade partnership, and perhaps align with Africa's Agenda 2063's vision of self-reliance, industrialization, and global governance. So it's a very beautiful pathway to Africa's developmental goals, which is rooted in mutual respect, shared aspiration, and partnership. I think I'll stop here for the next round of interventions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dean. And you've raised some very central questions about Africa and BRICS. We already are seeing some questions come in, but first our concluding speaker, last but definitely not least, is Dr. Hippolyte Fofack, who is a leading development economist with 25 years of experience in leadership and management, development, and banking, international finance, and academia. He is a research associate at Harvard University, Parker Fellow with the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network at Columbia, and most recently, Chief Economist and Director of Research and International Cooperation at the African Export-Import Bank. So Dr. Fofack, and just an explanation for those of you in the room and online, we've lost both our primary and backup internet providers, so we are now on cell phones. So sometimes the so-called first world can look very much like the third world. Dr. Fofack.
And very often, Africa is often very marginalized. So it's very interesting that you will actually create a space to have a real debate that connect Africa to the rest of the world. I've actually put together a PowerPoint presentation to really guide our discussions so that we are all on the same page. And I believe that the BRICS is perhaps one of the most significant development in the world affairs in a long time, And it may even be here to stay, quite frankly. And how do we make sure that in that context, that Africa can get best out of it? And that's specifically what I will try to actually articulate in this presentation. I haven't heard from all my previous speakers. And I think it's fair to say that when you look at the opening statement of the BRICS, their main objectives, and it's essentially what we heard earlier, how to bring country together and foster economic, cultural exchange for a better world, to create a condition for economic development. And that summary, that statement actually captures very well the essence of the BRIC philosophy and overarching objectives. And we have the 5 initial countries. But if you go back to the BRICS, the way it actually started, and it's amazing that this baby that Goldman Sachs actually gave birth to this baby. And that's where it all started, about 2001. And the idea was that perhaps by mid-century, these 4 countries will become the pillar of the global economy. And they were so right, because that's specifically what seemed to be happening. And later on, South Africa was added to that. I think what was an academic exercise became an institutional framework and promoted by Russia and China when they had the first meeting in Russia in 2009. And the following year, they added South Africa to the list and then created the BRICS as we know them. And as predicted by Goldman Sachs, these 4 countries, perhaps 5, are set to become very powerful. And they achieved that goal not in 2050 by mid-century, but much earlier than anticipated. And China is already the 2nd largest economy. If you go by PPP, they may actually be the first. Just look at the numbers. It's actually happened much earlier than what was anticipated. On the PPP scale, I think China has actually made it. So the BRICS economically, as predicted by Goldman Sachs, are on a strong growth trajectory. And China has also become a significant source of FDI for the African continent, and similarly, the largest African trading partner, accounting for more than 20% of African trade. And the BRICS expansion will actually catalyze more FDI into the continent, as well as technology transfer. I think one of the key constraints to Africa development for decades has been the technology. I think they can even harness technology to generate the power to transform the Inga Dam into an asset, or to look at the renewable energy space that we have, whether it's sun and so forth. I think in the world of high geopolitical tensions and increasing weaponization of the US dollars, I think the BRICS has also become a very powerful, as we heard earlier, geopolitical force, allowing member countries to hedge against risk, the risk that we see in terms of access to finance, in terms of financial sanction and so forth. So the BRICS actually doing a major role in the hedging process. And boosted by those strong economic and geopolitical tailwinds, the BRICS have actually taken a global significance and are generating a lot of interest, especially in the global south. Therefore, the issue of expansions has actually become a very important topic, as we heard earlier. I think after this brief overview, I think we will then focus on what are the benefits. And I think the BRICS overarching objective is quite clear: to promote cooperation, economic cooperation, technology transfer, and cultural exchange. And those objectives were actually fully much aligned with what happened in Rio earlier this month, which the theme was strengthening global South cooperation for more inclusive and sustainable governance. That's reflected in those objectives. And the group has been on a strong growth trajectory. As I said, India and China together accounted for nearly 50% of global trade last year, according to IMF. And China alone actually was 28% of global growth last year. It's quite significant for one single country. In PPP term, I think the contribution of BRICS countries to global GDP actually overtook the G7 much earlier in 2020. This is definitely not what the Goldman Sachs anticipated when they say that. But the march is on, and the gap has certainly widened if you include a country like Indonesia, which joined in January. It's a very large economy on the G20 economy. And that's where we are in terms of global contribution GDP. I think the BRICS have taken over. And I think that gap will only widen over time as more countries integrate, but also as India turbocharge. India is growing at more than 5%, And that's quite significant, as you can see, as we move forward. The Ukraine crisis, now we're in the geopolitical space, the Ukraine crisis has presented an opportunity to actually assess the BRICS group's level of commitment to the idea of promoting economic cooperation among its members. I think BRICS countries have offered trade diversion and other relief to Russia, hindering the effectiveness of Western sanctions and sustaining economic growth. Imagine Russia growing at 4%, while Germany has been contracting consistently for the last 2-3 years. I think we've seen that significantly, how trade between Russia and BRICS member countries has increased significantly, while trade between Russia and the G7 country have contracted quite significantly since the outbreak of the Ukraine crisis. I wanted to stop here and for us to really define what BRICS is, because there's been an attempt to shift the focus as to what BRICS is or should be. I think BRICS is not an entire Western institutions or grouping, as it's often said. It's always presented in opposition to the West. And we all witnessed what President Trump said during the summit. Any country aligning themselves with anti-American policy, BRICS will be charged 10% tariff. But the BRICS are not about real anti-Americans. In fact, many BRICS countries depend heavily on the US for trade. And one example is India, for instance. I think nearly 20% of India trade to the US. So there's no way the BRICS can actually go head to head in terms of being entire West. It's a condition where we are creating the space to essentially accelerate what I call global convergence. That's where the key issue is. The multipolarity promoted by the BRICS bloc can actually catalyze global growth and accelerate that global conversion that we need so much. At the same time, I believe expanding middle class in the BRICS countries represent a strong and growing market for the West and for US multinational corporations. Just look at in 2024 last year, Apple derived 60% of its revenue from international markets, including 15% from China. So that dependency is such that we have to create conditions for work together. On the BRICS, multipolarity could actually transcend the old developing country dichotomy. It's been a key constraint to that global convergence. I think that's one thing that I believe the BRICS will do, so that we can actually project ourselves beyond that dichotomy and have a better world of shared prosperity. Another aspect of BRICS that we've heard very often is that, it's a non-aligned movement. It's 21st century of it. It's not important. And we've heard that a lot. But I think there's also been that attempt. But back then, I think the handful of countries emerging from independence were actually too weak economically to stand a chance to make any confrontations or to really challenge the status quo. I think today, several of these former colonies have become very powerful force at the global stage. I think India overtook the UK in 2022 to become the world's largest economy. And they're actually aspiring to even better. If you just look at the quote by Moti, can we see that last quote? Is it possible? Yes, the quote says we've actually, that's Modi and the Indian Prime Minister. We've surpassed those who ruled us for 250 years in economic growth. We've broken the shackle of thousands of years of slavery, and we will not stop here now. We will only move forward. That's Modi, really exuberant after that historical shift in terms of contribution to global growth. And that's actually what happened. And that made Modi so excited about the rise of India economically in the global stage. China has become one of the most technologically advanced countries in the world. In other words, these are not the Bandung Conference, 1960 non-aligned movement. We have strong economic entities that we are dealing with now in the 21st century. And I look at the data on science and technology and the patents. I think China actually produced more than 1.6 million patents last year, which is quite significant in terms of technology. Most BRIC nations have become fully integrated into global supply chains, and in some cases actually leading the supply chains. Look at electric vehicles, look at nuclear technology, and increasingly space technology. And that's the global supply chain in 2019. If you go back to 1961, the non-aligned movement, that configuration was simply not there. What's quite interesting here is the absence of Africa, essentially. So we have concentration in Europe, North America, and Asia in terms of global supply chains. And how do we make sure that within the BRICS context, we have that new configuration of global supply chain, which is more integrated, globally integrated. So non-aligned movement was an embryo of diplomatic coalition with neither economic nor technological truth. Conversely, the BRICS is set to become one of the most powerful economic groups in the world, with most of its members leveraging technology frontier to drive growth. By 2050, I think the world's 7 largest economy will be among those 7 largest economies. I think 5 will be BRICS, with China and India in the top 2 spots, which is the next 25, 30 years. Now, back to our BRICS expansion, I think the combinations of economic and geopolitical return and increasing benefits have actually accelerated the need to integrate this grouping. I think more than 40 countries have actually applied, and 4 countries were admitted last year under the South African presidency, and Indonesia actually joined early this year. But we also have what we call several members, which are partners. And among those members, we have, as mentioned, Nigeria and Uganda, but also the fastest growing economies such as Vietnam, Malaysia, and Thailand, which will actually make that widening gap more important. So that we have the geographical representation of the BRICS coverage, full member and partner countries. You can see the potential growth of BRICS in terms of expansion will actually come from Africa. We look at the project in the next 5-10 years. Many more come from the continent to sustain that expansion going forward. And BRICS partner countries actually have access to fast-growing emerging market economy. And as we expand that grouping, the demand within that space is making it much more easier to actually rely on local currency for trading. And at the same time, partner countries are eligible for loans and technical assistance without conditionality. And the status of partner countries increases as a stepping stone to become full members. And the growing benefit of BRICS enjoyed by BRICS members will increase as the bloc continue to expand, allowing countries to leverage the benefit of scale and sustain demand of new membership. So as that expands, the level of production within that space will justify that local currency trading. The benefits are going to be significant. The bloc expansion is an ongoing process, one that is likely to have significant implications. Now look at the implication for Africa. As in the BRICS expansions, especially the admission of a growing number of African countries, is generally positive. You can look in terms of trade, in terms of investment, financing, in terms of technology transfer, but also geopolitics and global governance. I look at it from 5 different standpoints, vectors, and in terms of African trade, and promoting South-South trade has been a growth strategy for the continent for many years. And under that strategy, we saw China becoming a major single largest African trading partner. I think BRICS expansion will allow Africa to deepen its trade with other partners such as Brazil, India, Russia, but also Indonesia, which is a large economy. And we see that happening already in terms of India overtaking the US 2 years ago to become Africa's second largest trading partner, right after China. So that will actually allow Africa to diversify its trading partner and achieve South-South growth. This will actually accelerate that sorts of growth and economic development within the regions and further mitigating Africa's exposure to global volatility in terms of trade deteriorations. Here we have a graph really summarizing what has happened in US-Africa trade versus China-Africa trade. Some might wonder, why will we actually bother to put a tariff on African trade? What can we possibly get, given where we are in terms of less than $10 billion? So that's where we are in terms of that direction. We have to, as a US, find a way to reverse that declining trend and reboot and boost US-African trade if you're ready to be part of this, what is the change in the world. The second angle is investment. I think opportunity for investment are also significant. As expansion increase market size and demand within BRICS economy, investment will have to follow to boost that domestic supply. In this context, we believe that BRICS expansion may attract FDI into the continent, for instance, into the power sector, manufacturing. And for instance, we see this already. Egypt accession that will enable it to fund major projects in renewable energy, transport infrastructure, using BRICS source capital. India has also increased investment in Egypt in pharmaceutical industry and the food sector. And the BRICS expansion has also catalyzed technology transfer, with Russia building Egypt's first nuclear power plant in El Daba. And the BRICS multilateral guarantee will actually further accelerate investment, especially by allowing for co-financing of BRICS project. And we heard about the AFCFTA earlier, and the BRICS will actually perhaps help accelerate implementation of the AFCFTA. I believe that in addition to developing manufacturing industries to boost intra-African trade, expansion could actually catalyze even more support for cross-border infrastructure investment, critical for intra-regional trade. We all remember what China did between Addis Ababa and Djibouti in the railways. We need more of that to boost intra-African trade. But another important constraint to intra-African trade, beside production and manufacture goods and trade-enabling infrastructure, is trade finance. Even though African trade has shifted to the east, the financing of African trade has remained stuck in the west. The network effect of the US dollars has played a major role on that. And across Africa, the balance of payment constraint associated with dollar funding have had significant impact on both extra and intra-African trade, and I estimate that the financing gap is in the range of 420 billion annually. It's got significance. I think BRICS expansion will enable African countries to leverage best practice globally to accelerate the use of local currency for cross-border trade and perhaps implementation of the Pan-African Payment Settlement System launched by the African Export-Import Bank. Indonesia has emerged as regional, if not global leader within ASEAN and has been championing the use of local currency for cross-border trade transactions among Southeast Asian nations to promote trade and investment. I think Africa will learn from that experience in the use of local currency to actually mitigate risk, currency risk, but also address trade financing gap. An estimate shows that Africa could actually save more than $5 billion annually if it were to use local currency for cross-border trade. BRICS expansion could also catalyze technology transfer and accelerate the growth of manufacturing industries and development regional value chains that actually help advance that integrations. And the fourth one, it's access to financing and financial stability. And the settling of trade in local currency has been ongoing, and will probably accelerate after the Ukraine crisis. We all now know that most trade between India and Russia are settled in rupee and rubles. The use of local currency for trade settlements among BRICS members reduce cost, ease pressure on foreign reserve, and also accelerate and help financial stability. BRICS expansion will further increase the scope of cross-border trade settled in local currencies, further easing balance of payment pressure, but also especially in country leverage BRIC Pay and BRICS interbank cooperation mechanism. Those two instruments, BRIC Pay and BRICS interbank cooperation mechanism, are key in actually making that local currency operational. But there are other reasons. BRICS expansion may also enhance currency and financial stability within the region through the use of three key instruments. And the first is what I call the BRIC contingent reserve arrangement to access liquidity in terms of crisis. That's very important. If you go back to the 1997 East Asian crisis, which became a major crisis because access to liquidity, short-term liquidity, was simply not possible. I think that contingency reserve arrangement will mitigate that risk of balance of payment crisis, turning into a major economic crisis. Access to central bank swap line is also critical. And the Federal Reserve has been very important in actually helping advanced economies through its swap line mitigate any short-term balance of payment crisis. But what has been quite interesting is that the Fed swap line has essentially been with G7 countries. If you look at the list, Europeans, Japan, England, the UK, Canada. And during the COVID-19 pandemics, they actually expanded that swap line, to include other countries. That's the new list. But what's interesting is that they still did not include a single country from the continent on that, the Fed beneficiary of the Fed swap line. And what has happened is that access to BRIC New Development Bank resources actually made possible to mitigate that. But China has also established swap lines with African countries, with South Africa and the Central Bank of Nigeria, the Reserve Bank of South Africa. So those swap lines that they could not access from the Fed, now they're able to access the swap line to mitigate that recurrent balance of payment crisis, which tend to be quite often. And the New Development Bank is also issuing loans in local currency to further facilitate that transitions. The last one, I think we have greater representations in global governance. I think BRICS expansion could actually amplify African voices and agency in global institutions, including the UN, World Bank, but also the IMF. I think look at the quota, where the whole African continent has 6.5%, just about Japan, in terms of IMF quota. And the BRICS are pushing for realignment in general quota, the general review of quota, the 17th one undertaken by the IMF, pushing for to reflect a better representation of the global economy since World War II. At the same time, I think expansion may give African countries great geopolitical leverage and autonomy in international relations, and the diversification of funding sources is already enabling African countries to enjoy the benefit of competition, geopolitical competitions offered by the BRICS expansions. To conclude, I think I've painted a very nice picture of the BRICS. And now let's look at the other side of it. And the economic and geopolitical benefit of BRICS blocks are already significant and will increase over time as more member countries leverage technology, diffusions, and economies of scale associated with expansion to hedge against geopolitical risk and alleviate balance of payment pressure associated with dollar funding, but also boost economic growth. However, while the benefit of BRICS expansions are substantial, The expansion move is not a risk-free propositions and could raise various challenges, both at the group level, or BRICS, but also within the African continent. Let's start with the group level. BRICS expansion could actually expose African countries. Let's start with the African context. BRICS expansion could expose African countries to extractions. Could have China and India getting into more resource extraction within the continent, sustaining that debilitating colonial model of resource extraction, which has been responsible for recurring balance of payment crisis and intergenerational poverty within the regions. I think already African countries are exporting raw material to China and importing finished products and incurring structural trade deficits. I think that is one major risk that we are facing, that expansions. BRICS expansion is not a necessary and sufficient conditions for development and economic transformations in Africa, though its economic and geopolitical benefit are significant and already felt across the whole continent. Unless there is a strong commitment within the region to deepen economic integrations and lift the constraints of market segmentations to catalyze the development of regional value chains and industrializations, BRICS expansions risk perpetuating that resource extractions and further widening the income gap between Africa and the rest of the world, including the developing world. And mind you, the gap between Africa and Asia in terms of income has widened considerably. That's a major risk. At the BRIC levels, expansion increased the vulnerability to political, geopolitical differences, making it even more difficult to reach decision by consensus in the short term and posing risk, survival risk to the group in the medium and long term. How to ensure that the future of BRICS is not affected by election cycle at national level, as we saw in Argentina, where the previous administration was very committed, then Milei came, and that commitment almost disappeared. And this risk is very important because it reflects the fact that countries are not always aligned culturally, ideologically, and historically. How to ensure that short-term interests do not trump long-term commitment in the absence of cultural, ideological, and geopolitical alignment. Weak internal coherence and ideological alignment, as well as divergent interests and ambitions, were already a challenge aptly exploited when there were only 5 countries. Aptly exploited. We see how Modi became the most sexy thing on earth. Macron after him, Biden after him. Aptly exploited. One can only wonder what could happen to the group amid expansion. Thank you very much.
What we've heard and seen on the screen is quite a different perspective from what we've seen in the New York Times and the Washington Post, and raises some really interesting questions, some of which will be covered, I can't resist forward promotion, a week from today at the Public Diplomacy Council First Monday session about the challenges to U.S. soft power in Africa. And I think we're seeing some of them right here. I can't resist taking the moderator's prerogative and just throwing something out as that happened over the weekend. Saturday's Financial Times, front page, 4-column headline. 1/4 of all of China's kindergartens have closed in the last 4 years. How are they surviving? They're being turned into senior citizen centers. So China is going to be facing some real questions. So one of the agencies that Africa has may be that it's growing. as opposed to many of the G7 states, most of the G7 states, uh, and uh, and China facing issues. So let me just throw that out. We have some questions coming in, but anybody who would like to address any of our speakers who would like to come back and address some of the points, please just raise your hand on the screen and we can see you. Anybody here in the room who has a question, quick, raise your hand physically. Carrington, it looks like you have the first hand up.
The senior centers that you referred to, are they incorporating a program where elder people take care of younger people? Is that part of the process? Or are they just eliminating the younger people?
Take that.
And I think, and thank you very much, Adam, for bringing that issue of demographic tipping point. I think a couple of years ago, there was a very nice article on Japan that Japan was producing more diapers for senior citizens than for babies. And this was about a decade ago. So the demographic crisis is something that has been in the making. And most countries are actually below the demographic tipping point of 2.1. I think China went to 1.65 last year. And I think the whole of Asia, at least East Asian emerging market economy, are really below that, solid below that tipping point. And it is a real issue. And the US has actually somehow escaped that challenge by relying on immigrations. Immigration actually allowed the US to sustain growth, even though its demographic has also fallen below the tipping point. And the key issue here is Africa has that potential as perhaps the only region in the world where population is still growing, around four per family, per woman, which is above that demographic tipping point 2.1. And how do we make sure that we turn that demography into an asset? Human capital development is a key challenge. And the successful demographic transition that we saw in Asia reflected sustained investment in human capital. And that's something that Africa has not done very much, which raises a risk of turning that, what you consider as asset, into a time bomb. And in terms of security, in terms of employment, mind you, if you look at South Africa, for instance, which has been the country where most Africans are migrating for opportunities, which has the best statistics on employment. Unemployment rate in South Africa is 33%. It's quite significant, which take us back to the need to really invest in human capital and create the condition for expansion of employment opportunities within the continent. The issue of manufacturing industrialization will be very important to ensuring that we do not have that sustained migrations to the rest of the world, which is no longer very much welcome, whether we are in Europe or in the US.
Again, any questions physically here in Washington or on screen for those who are logged in? Professor Johnson.
So the comment for the my country is that problem right now. I think we invested quite a lot. I have to develop following a series of UN reports on Nigeria. Unfortunately, all gone. To develop human capital with the policy and objective of keeping them home, to develop the country, some strange reason you are able to keep them. So they become, they go somewhere else. I'm sure most of us are aware a very high proportion of medical doctors in the universities, whereas in other European countries are from Nigeria. Yet the hospitals we have in Nigeria are not working. This cuts across all the sectors of the economy. So when we talk about development of human capital for national development, we must have a backstopping program which enables you to after development. If you don't do that, then developing your human capital for emigration, just a comment. Please.
Given the Trump edict, do you think there's going to be first migration back to Nigeria, back to whatever country from the diaspora that's here?
I don't think so, because the Trump administration is 4 years.
3 years.
And 4 years is a short time. No, it's not an assumption. I mean, there's no way Trump can extend his tenure. So I went to school here. I went to school here, and I know that it's a country that has the ability of dealing with adverse conditions that affect domestic and international relations. So I'm very much convinced that in the next 8 years, what Trump may have stalled in his second 4 years will reverse. That's my theory, that's my hypothesis. Because the US is not like most other countries. The US is not a dictatorship. And no matter how Trump may want to assert his overbearing influence on all kinds of things, America has the capacity to change these backwards. So that is why response to that. Some of the things that it's doing now could be reversed by the same principles with which you put them in place. In quotes, executive order. This is my understanding of the American political system. I was school here, and they're observing from a distance, it's other place.
Seeing hands here in Washington, please.
Michael Henderson, recent graduate of Georgetown University, public policy. I think it's a great opportunity, but also a challenge. You think about in terms of the population, and Indonesia and Africa is projected to increase by 1 billion. And it seems almost as a direct correlation, at least on your data and other speakers on PPP and GDP in relation to the Western world. I'd love to hear maybe your approach or just thoughts in general on the role of young people, which seem to be 60, 70, 80% of the population of these aging nations, right? And then lastly, I'll say that it's interesting, the age of leadership, not only on the continent, but also in this country as well.
If you go back to what happened in France under that immigration policy, at some point they had a policy called selective immigrations, what they call immigration choisie, which means that we just go for the best and ensure that that brain drain continue. I think even under the Trump administrations, they are still committed to that immigration choisie, selective immigrations, those who are the engineers and the ITs and so forth. It's very important. But I think when we talk of the youth, and what India and China have done actually can actually help inspire the youth, the transformation of the system to empower the youth. And I look at the data recently, and China produced more than 1.5 million engineers, whether it's material science, computer sciences, IT, you name it, aerospace. In addition to those 1.5 million, they have excellent technical vocational training school, graduating 300,000 a year. You combine those two, then you have what is needed to transform your economy, to stem that immigration. Yes. And I'm saying this because it's quite remarkable. And a couple of, I think it was last July, we had a meeting with some number of African head of state in New York. And they kept saying, we need money, Hippolyte. All we need is money. At some point I said, Mr. President, are you sure the real issue is money? He said, yes, if you have. So suppose you're given, I said, suppose you're given $50 billion right now. Will you deliver the Inga Dam? He said, yes, we'll deliver the Inga Dam. I said, I'm not sure you will do that. He said, why not? I said, because you may have to bring in Chinese or Indian or Italian engineers to build that dam. One will look at me and say, you're right. In my country, 85% of graduates from high school are into social science, history, and philosophy. I think to develop a country, you need engineers and scientists. You're not producing enough of those. But if we start doing that, Africa will stop importing microwave, will stop importing refrigerator. Mind you, the hottest continent year-round in the world is Africa. We do not manufacture AC for home. We import ACs. I look at the data, 85% of malaria patients in the world are in Africa, with more than half in Nigeria. We cannot manufacture a single drug for malaria. We import all that. What is a source of balance of payment pressure and becomes an opportunity? And that's what you can actually do for the youth. Of course, I think my 95 years old President Paul Biya is not someone who can do this. We need young people like Judy to be leading that effort. People who can stay up all night. Because to do this, you have to be very energetic. And the good news that we have younger leaders who are emerging in part of the continent who can actually do this, who knows that we have to be accountable to set goals and monitor those goals.
I'm wondering, how long do you think it would take before the new development bank surpasses the World Bank in terms of finance development?
I think now the World Bank remains one of the most capitalized development bank in the world. It's a bank of the world, and the BRICS banks, New Development Bank, it's a bank for a handful of countries. And whether it is China or India, their contribution to the World Bank capital is much larger than what we have with the World Bank. And so the issue is, the World Bank has been around for 80 years, and the growth of a financial institution is not just the capital base, but also investment to sustain that growth. And given that the biggest project which actually helped the World Bank grow before they move into the balance of payment support on the McNamara was infrastructure development. But in those big projects, remember the first major project that Ghana did after independence, funded by the World Bank, was the Akosombo Dam. And that Akosombo Dam is what's continuing to power Ghana up till today. So the new development bank, NDB, will have to start doing consequential projects to sustain their growth, return on investment, and so that the capital base that they have is multiplied.
And most recently, Dr. Fofack, you and I had a long conversation about this. And how can BRICS assets and initiatives be leveraged for sustainable institutions in Africa? And I'll just throw out two experiences that I've had. In the early 1980s, in Nigeria, the Nigerian Senate and the Nigerian Television Authority had a very simple goal. They said, we have the resources, financial resources, to be equal to Viz News in the UK or to the EBU News Network Consortium. All we need is some technical advice. And we put together a 17-person team, half from CBS News, half from other television operations in New York, and spent 4 years in Lagos and in the States around Nigeria, strengthening the technical infrastructure. The resources were there. And in fact, I remember one person at NTA said, we want to have the NTA 9 o'clock news. You come from CBS News, so we want to have the NTA 9 o'clock news look like the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. You probably don't want to do that. You probably want it to look like the NTA 9 o'clock news in Nigeria. So we never interfered with editorial control. We survived the first coup. But after the second coup, it's as if interests just, and they were that close to having the dream. The satellites were in place, the technical facilities in Lagos were in place, the affiliates around Africa were in place. They could easily have done what Eurovision was doing, which is a late morning feed of news material, an afternoon feed of news material, again, for use around the continent, around the world, but it didn't survive. How do we get institutions to survive? And it's BRICS part of that.
And how do we make sure that a good development project is not affected by democratic transitions? It's not just for coup. Even in the right democratic setting, you have cases whereby we have a good development project, but because the other party has actually won the election, they come and just scrap it and go back to the drawing board. Development cannot happen when there are discontinuity consistently. And countries which have succeeded, look at India, for instance, which is on that path. The IIT system, the Indian Institute of Technology, was established right after Nehru. It has remained an institution of promotion of excellence in science and engineering. When I visited IIT Bombay, there was a story. The president of IIT Bombay told us a story. He said, Hippolyte, this year, the son of the prime minister failed the common entrance exam into IIT. We say this loudly to make the point that we are a merit-based institutions. I said, if you say that in Cameroon, that the daughter of Paul Biya has failed the test, I think you are. So I think it's very important to ensure that there is continuity when there are good ideas. And by doing that, IIT has remained a merit-based institutions for the last 60, 70 years. So you're raising a fundamental development issue, which is how do we ensure that there are continuity when we have a good project on the table? And that's the only way. I don't know how we're going to do that, but that's the answer to your questions, to make sure that we have the system in place, whether it is democratic transition or not, good idea will continue. It takes 15, 20 years to deliver a good project, not 4 years.
We have two hands raised, and then we'll go to closing remarks. Let's go to Mala F. I saw you have your hand up.
Yes, hi. I have a question. What responsibilities, if at all, do diasporic Africans have in helping ensure that BRICS engagement doesn't replicate extractive or neocolonial models of development?
Let's see, 2007, I began an Africa initiative at, I was vice provost at USC. I began an Africa initiative, and the president of the university said, we're not very well known for our work in Africa. And I said, well, Steve Sample. And I said, Dr. Sample, with all due respect, this university isn't well known for its work in Africa in Los Angeles. It's much better known for its work in Africa. Because I kept running into people on trips to Africa, which I make every year, who knew a lot about USC activities, clinics in East Africa, engineering partnership with Botswana, all these things. But in USC, typical of universities, the schools weren't talking to each other. And so my next appointment after seeing the president was with the university's vice provost for academic affairs. And I said, the president wants to find out what's going on at USC with Africa projects. How am I going to find out? USC is even more decentralized than most universities. And he said, oh, simple, bribery. What? He said, bribe them. You send around a classic viral invitation to a nice lunch at the faculty club with nice wine if you can afford it, and see who shows up. That was a Thursday. Friday, we sent out the invitation. Monday, I walked in and my budget director said, we need a bigger room. It was like the line in Jaws, you need a bigger boat. You need a bigger room. I said, why? We have more than 100 RSVPs over the weekend. We identified at USC more than 200 faculty members in every school, all 19 professional schools, pharmacy, all of them, dentistry. They all had Africa projects, but no one was talking to each other. So I think one start is simply to have universities have a central point of coordination or central point of information of what's happening. The other thing that we're doing, and we had a meeting about this the beginning of this month, is to form an Africa-US university network. And we have a number of partners, university partners in Africa who took part, several here in the United States, including our regular partners in this monthly series, Howard University and George Washington University here in Washington. So that's a start, but it needs to be sustained and grown. And everybody identifies as one of the early problems, just getting it funded. Where are we going to get the resources? So that is something which we are working on. There's going to be, I was interested in the universities that actually were in person in Johannesburg at the conference. Xavier had, I think, 2 or 3 people. There were a couple of other HBCUs. Interesting. Here in our network here in the US, Virginia Tech has an interesting program. So there's some dots that need to be connected as a start. But we have a couple of people here and a couple of people online whose PhDs or other graduate degrees are from China. And so we know that the Chinese are not going to sit still.
And I think the key question we have is that does the US, Europeans, inclusive, diaspora, African diaspora or not, has interest in creating the condition for retention of African within the continent? The key question we have is that, for the diaspora question, is that, does the US and Europeans, do they have interest in creating the condition for welfare improvement and retention within the continent? And I think if they are really against immigrations, and the best way to actually ensure that immigration pressure subside is to industrialize Africa and to create the conditions for economic development to emerge and be sustained over time. I think we cannot have it both ways all the time, where we want African resources, but we don't want African to come. I think the diaspora has to actually champion that message. Let for once create the conditions for true economic development within the African continent to stem the migration pressure. I think what we are doing in terms of engineering science is fantastic.
I have lived through some of these issues. I came to the United States the first time in Kennedy. There was an Aspire scholarship program. It was a university program. It was excellent. lot of Africans, lot of Nigerians were trained. Some went back, some stayed here. Then there was the African American Institute scholarships. University to university. A lot were trained, some went, some stayed behind. Then there is AFGRA. Then there is USAID. All of these were programs with extremely good intentions. But the problem was it's not achieved what I say. They did not prevent this migration. And when I look back at a lot of my colleagues who stayed behind, and those of us who were stupid enough to go back, I believe that they made a big mistake. Those of us who went back had the opportunity of going back and forth and sorting ourselves out, trying to solve the problems of sustainability, trying to convince governments that must do this, must do that, even though they don't listen to us. Our presidents are not different from beer. So there's a real issue. I was the executive secretary of the Organization of African Unity, Scientific, Technical, and Research Commission for 15 years before I went back to the university. When you talk of science, technology, and innovations, talk to heads of states, make resolutions, they go back. After 2063 is not going to materialize. And to ask me why, my simple answer is that this is not what the countries want to do. They accept the resolutions, but they don't do it. That's one big problem. The other problem is the developed countries do what they do in self-interest. So to expect that they are going to give up that self-interest to allow you to industrialize against their own national objectives is a tall order. And that's one of the things that Trump is fighting against. Don't export whatever. So it is a real problem until we have African system that is willing to take the bull by the horn and say, we can survive on our own. We will not be able to achieve most of these things. There's a fragile attempt to do that right now with Traore and his group. If that model succeeds, then probably some African countries will be able to take their responsibilities seriously and continue to develop themselves. Finally, I am more concerned about these 4 or 5 areas of risk that we talk about. How do we mitigate those areas? I don't think that the Chinese are coming to the continent because they like the Africans. Resource extraction is a primary motivation. Okay, how do you create a situation in which you can tell the Chinese, yes, but come here, establish the industry that will make you extract lithium, but keep it here, and we can sell the lithium to you at our own price, not at your dictated price. They will not accept. So those 4 areas we talked about, the vulnerability of what is going to happen to BRICS is a real threat. It's not an imagined threat. And so when my president came back from that meeting, well,
some of us are not close to government, but we talk amongst ourselves. Pontificate and we say this is another dead end, because what is being proposed is never going to happen. I think quite seriously, the one possibility is what Powell had just mentioned. The whole issue of institutional sustainability. Africa has extremely weak institutions. And I mean it, extremely weak. You cannot get an organization that sustains for 10 years. It is either it's criticized out of function or it just dies a natural death. So we have that problem. It's not that we do not know what to do, but maybe we don't know how to do it. So that is one missing link in the entire system of development. I have a very strong feeling, I'm in the wrong, that the expansion of BRICS to Africa is in the best interest of those who were the original protagonists of the BRICS concept. The Cold War is ended, the competition is still on, so let's devise another system that will confront this existing giant. And that's my concept, but I may not be able to live long enough to see that materialize. But Africa has got to take its own responsibility and do what it wants to do in the African way. And until we are right close to that, we'll think perhaps difficult. The Chinese closed themselves from the world. Were able to get to where they want to get to before they started opening up. Africa is told every day that you must go. And God doesn't make sense to me. I said that many years ago. It failed. I'm happy to be here to personally participate. I always participated on Zoom. Sometimes I'm lucky to get connected all through the program. Sometimes I only get about half of it. But visiting the US this time, I felt I should be here. I'm grateful for Mr. Powell for the kind invitation. I'm still here till the end of August. I probably would like to attend next week. Thank you.
Carlos. Thank you. Thank you very much, Adam. And yeah, this has been very informative to me. I'm one of the new presidents of the Public Diplomacy Council of America. And if this topic is of interest to you, as Adam hinted a few times before, we are doing another forum next Monday. This is our first Monday forum of every month, similar to the monthly gatherings you do. Very close at the Elliott School at noon, so you don't have to get up so early. And if you get there, it starts at 12, but if you get there at 11:30, there are usually sandwiches available as well. And encourage those who are here in DC to attend in person, and those who wish to attend virtually to also do it. You can get more information at publicdiplomacy.org. That's the website for the Public Diplomacy Council. The speakers next Monday include Dr. Richard White, who is from the Pew Research Institute, and he has new findings on public attitudes in Africa towards China, which is a topic we've discussed today. So the latest Pew research may be of interest. We also have Colonel Robert Hamilton from the Foreign Policy Research Institute, Eurasia Program. Judd Devermont, who was Director of African Affairs at the National Security Council from 2021 to 24. So certainly on the US policy side, he can present. And coordinator of the event is Ambassador Larry Wohlers, who served in Central African Republic and has spent a lot of his career focused on US public diplomacy in Africa. And I would just summarize what I've heard and learned today. I'm wondering how many people have heard of someone. I wrote an article a few months ago. One of the greatest people that ended up being an enemy of Africa was a person called Gert von Kramer. Has anyone ever heard of Gert von Kramer before? He was not an Afrikaner. He was actually from Flemish territory before Belgium existed, and his Latin name is Mercator. And Mercator drew a map.
He was one of the ones that oversaw operations in the Belgian Congo for King Leopold.
Nope, or another one, Van Kramer, but this one was a map maker in the 1500s, and he decided to make a map of the world, and he had to make it all fit. So his way of making it all fit was to distort the lines longitude, so it could all fit on one piece of paper. And what he did was he made Europe and North America and Greenland and Russia seem enormous, and he made Africa seem very small, and other countries in the south, to make it fit on his map. Mercator's projection, Mercator's maps. And I wrote this article, The Curse of Mercator, because it has caused the world for hundreds of years to not realize that Africa is the second largest continent in land area. It has some of the world's richest resources and always has 87% of the world's platinum. Now, as we heard today, it has the world's second largest population and one of the fastest growing populations in the world. How that resource, because people are resources, how that is used, if they are given opportunity to make Africa stronger, and they don't all become diaspora alone, I think is one of the greatest potential strengths for Africa. And we really have to all put our minds together on African solutions for African issues and figure ways to use that huge growing resource to make Africa truly second largest to Asia economically, politically, and in terms of culture and social values, and get away from the curse of Mercator that made Europe and North America seem to be the largest continents in the world. So I've learned a lot from the options and the challenges ahead from today, and I really thank you for it. And I hope some of you can come next Monday to our program.
Thanks, Carl. And we're just about out of time, but I want to give each of our speakers an opportunity to make closing remarks. And let's start with Joel Odota, because I think it's 1 a.m. there. So if you could unmute yourself and give any closing remarks you would like to present.
It's quite dark here. It's an evening actually. And I'm grateful for all the speakers. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think it has been a wonderful exchanges. And I think the strategic implication of what we've been talking about is just to say that the inclusion of more African countries into BRICS reflects and accelerates a shift from what traditionally has been a hegemonic global order to a better multipolar one, where we can have more shared governance, reshaped realities and aspiration of the global south could be more tackled. However, as it has been emphasized, I believe too, it's not a replacement for the global north, because those interactions will still exist and will continue to exist. But it's a strategic complement that will enhance the BRICS' ability to negotiate better deals, assert their developmental efforts within the context of even Africa Agenda 2063, and shape a better, just international order. And so I want to end on that. But there was a question that was raised about the issue of the diaspora, and just in 3 seconds to share something that was just launched today in Nigeria. We call it Diaspora Bridge. And what we mean here is a key initiative of the government trying to design an empowering research, innovation, global collaboration with Nigerian academics or the academia abroad so that we can benefit from the global expertise, funding opportunities, industry linkages, and transfer of knowledge. So we are thinking that why they are being threatened, they have a country, they have a place, they have their knowledge to offer to us to help, so that they don't just, like one of the participants, I think of African origin, said that when you come back, the ground is laid, you can fit into it, and you don't just stay there. Your country is your country. Policies can come like they have come now that are threatening their sustainability and existence in those countries. So Nigeria is launching this, and it has been launched today. And I think we will be able to reach out, and it could be a model for other African countries that have a large diaspora to buy into. And this is in line with what the BRICS are talking about. Thank you very much for having me to participate.
Thank you. Dr. Fofack.
No, I think having been in here, I've benefited from my presence. And I just have to thank you very much for really putting together such a timely sessions. And how do we make sure that what emerged from today is actually implemented? And so that we can see change on the ground. Thank you very much.
Well, that's something that we'll be discussing in a number of bilaterals over the days and weeks ahead, because we certainly don't want it to stop here. One person who was with us, looks like he's gone now, from Los Angeles, Jeff Cowan at USC. He has a slogan: you should have meetings that matter. Don't just sit around the table and talk. Have meetings that matter. So that's our goal here. So thank you all for coming in person and online, and we look forward to seeing you a week from today, 12 noon Eastern Time at G.W. Elliott School around the corner, or online. And again, on August the 25th for our next monthly Africa-US Forum. So until then, we are adjourned. Thank you.